Hey y'all, it's me, Kevvie! So recently, one of my most anticipated new releases came out. It's called Manhunt by Gretchen Felker-Martin. It was a lot, but really good. And something I definitely think many of you could benefit from reading. I'm sure y'all are at least marginally aware of the gender-based apocalypse trope. These stories will typically either have the current patriarchal power structure inverted, putting women in a position of power over men, or otherwise eradicating one gender entirely. The problem with this trope is that in the vast majority of such stories, trans people are neglected. Most of the time, their authors will just act like trans people don't even exist. Sure, it may make their story easier to conceive of, but it also erases a whole bunch of people. So here comes Manhunt, a book balls deep in this gendered apocalypse trope. But the difference here is that this book is told primarily from the perspective of trans people. Already, that puts Manhunt at the forefront of this genre, exploring a super queer narrative that all the other cucks have been too afraid to consider. This book is so wonderfully trans. There are so many trans characters in this book, our main three being Fran, Beth, and Robbie. Fran is a really pretty trans girl and is able to pass pretty easily. At least she could have passed were she not stuck in an apocalypse scenario. Instead, she's roaming the wilderness with her lifelong best friend Beth, another trans woman who they describe as a brick. A term I haven't heard before. A brick is apparently a trans woman who is too ugly or grotesque to pass. A definition which hurts like a brick to the face. Oh, let's not call each other this, please. But yeah, Beth is tall, has large hands, and more masculine features. On their journeys, they meet Robbie, a trans man who stopped taking his T injections and so was spared by the apocalypse. Oh yeah, so in this world, the T-Rex virus targets anyone with too much testosterone in their system, transforming them into feral fuck machines. But miraculously, the ingestion of these new men's testicles somehow acts as a testosterone suppressant inside a T-girl system. So Beth and Fran have spent the past several years just hunting down these men, killing them, and cutting out their balls to eat. I love Beth so much. She was by far the most relatable character for me, and one of the most relatable characters I've read about ever. Her thoughts and feelings aligned with my trans experience so much. It was really heartbreaking. For example, when they first meet Robbie, that night, he and Fran fuck in the wilderness. Beth wakes up and sees it, and it crushes her. In the silver light, she saw Fran's hand uncurl at the bedroll's edge. Robbie laced his fingers through hers. One of them sighed, the sound of it soft and gentle in the stillness. Their joined silhouette undulated against the deeper darkness of the woods. Two nymph-like figures twining, clutching at each other. Everything fitting like it was meant to. I will never look that right with another person. This is just so relatable to the trans experience. A lot of times it feels like we're just not meant to be loved. I think I talked about that when I read Fairy Wing, with Drusilla saying this is not how it's supposed to go. It's not. Or at least, it very rarely is the case that we're treated with any kind of love or affection. Then, as Beth continues to watch them, she remembers a painful incident from earlier in the day when she was attacked by one of the feral men. It says, she thought of the man grunting atop her. That was the only way she would be touched. Again, this is just so true, it hurts. A lot of the time, we are at best a dirty secret. They want us, but are ashamed to admit so publicly. We are just objects to be fetishized, to be fucked and then fucked over. We're not people to be loved, we're just freaks and trannies. And Gretchen captured this reality so honestly. I love Beth, and I wish I could have just held her and told her that she was loved. Fran was sympathetically problematic. She finds herself fantasizing about the leader of the turfocracy, I'll get to that in a minute, considers herself superior to Beth because she can pass, and willfully ignores warnings that her trans comrades are in danger. I really appreciated Fran, even with her pitfalls, for showing that trans women are not always perfect or ideal or even likable. We are human and fallible and just as capable as anyone else of saying or doing the wrong thing. But we are still here and we still have intrinsic worth. I love her, and Beth loves her, and you should love her too. These two characters alone are reason enough to read this book. Let yourself meet Fran and Beth and get to know intimately these two transgender women. Manhunt has so many excellent trans characters, but it's also very cruel to these characters. This is where I feel I need to warn y'all about this book, specifically my trans audience, because this stuff is gonna hit different for y'all. This book is good, but very cruel. And some of the stuff I'm gonna say here is gonna be spoilery, and it could also be pretty triggering. Lots of violence in every conceivable fashion against trans women. So I'll leave a timestamp here and in the description if you need to skip all that. Spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The first word in this book is trannies. Which was just so euphoric for me. It made me feel seen like no book I've read before. But while I love the word tranny, like I explained in my February wrap-up, that is a word that's quite upsetting for a lot of trans people. So off the bat, there's an indication that trans people need to be careful when reading this book. Now, I mentioned earlier that this post-apocalyptic society is a turfocracy. This means the entire ruling system is now run by turfs. I don't think I need to explain to y'all what a turf is, but just in case, turfs are those fucking bitches who hate trans people and think we're just men trying to invade women's spaces. Prime example, J.K. Rowling. That fucking vile-ass woman has been using her massive platform to push an agenda that says that trans women are a threat to real women. Her disgusting behavior incites increased violence against transgender women. Basically, TERFs are trying to eradicate trans people. So fuck J.K. Rowling and fuck all the rest of them TERFs. So in this book, after the T-Rex virus has infected all the men, TERFs feel even more vindicated in their hatred of us trannies. Because the way they see it, people like Beth and Fran are ticking time bombs. If they ever run out of their medications or testicles, they'll get infected and become feral just like the men did. So for the protection of women, the TERFs follow a policy of kill on sight. Their entire government is built around policing transness, hunting down and executing any and all trans people to prevent them from possibly at some point turning. And that is how they justify their genocide. For example, Feather. Feather is a non-binary sex worker, because of course, even in the apocalypse, the only job a tranny can get is sex work. And one of their regulars is a TERF high up in their government. When the TERF leaders find out that one of their own has been getting fucked by a freak, they hunt Feather down and execute them in a huge public display. Speaking of sex work, Beth gets forced into sex work too. She has a steamy sexual affair with a coworker, and the other woman was super into it while it was happening. But then she remembered that trans people are disgusting and decided that she was no longer comfortable working with Beth, and got her fired. With no other jobs available to her, Beth is forced to work as a daddy. Trans women who present themselves as men so that their clients can pretend to be fucked by men again. Beth didn't want this job. It really hurt her to have to pretend to be a man, but she had no other choice. And as the book progresses, the TERF army goes to such extreme lengths to murder trans women. And while the apocalypse scenario is pure fantasy, everyone's treatment of trans people in response to this scenario was 100% real. This is how people think of us, and this is how we get treated. Every year, countless trans people get murdered just because they were trans. The apocalypse just gave them an excuse. And it's not just the TERFs. There's this awful scene of a queer collective house on T-Day, where in one day, a house goes from proudly displaying a sign that said, "This is a safe space for people of all genders, races, faiths, and sexualities," to evicting all their trans residents, and then murdering one who didn't want to leave. History has shown time and time again that even in the queer community, people will take any opportunity to to vilify and ostracize trannies. This book was so hard to read. Oftentimes, I couldn't even read more than 1 or 2 pages without having to stop. I kept running and hiding in another tab with a YouTube video or whatever, just something to protect myself from getting inundated with all of these atrocities. I wish I could have had someone with me to comfort me as I read, to hold my hands or just rub my back or just be there with me while I read this thing, because it's a really difficult read. On the one hand, it's magnificent. It made me feel seen in ways no book ever had. But then those trans characters that I related to are put through so much pain. I shouldn't have to be in this much pain in order to read about characters like me. Like toward the end, a whole coven of trans people are hiding out at this seaside bunker. They've built this massive wall to protect themselves. And the TERFs send trucks and feral men to tear down the wall. And they even have a fucking warship so they can bomb their victims from land and sea. Like, these poor people are just trying to protect themselves, and they have nowhere to go. Everywhere they turn, there are people killing them. Why can't they just let the fucking trannies live? They don't want to bother anybody. They just want to fucking live. Then they have to just bury all of their friends, all of these beautiful trans people who are just fighting to survive. And they get murdered and they have to bury them. It's so sad. Now, I'm not saying all of this as a criticism of the author or her vision. She can write whatever she wants. And she wrote it really well. This is just more about me as an individual reader and what I can handle. As a trans woman, this was just too much for me. But just because it was too much for me doesn't mean you shouldn't read it. I really think that if you can, you should give it a try. I mean, clearly the author has made her point. Outside the novel, in real life, trans people just want to live. Trans people just want to fucking live. Why can't people just leave us the fuck alone? Why do we have to live with a constant fear that getting clocked might cost us our lives? It's fucking bullshit. And people like J.K. Rowling need to fucking stop, because my people are dying because of her. She is killing us. Oh, but there's one more good thing about this book. J.K. Rowling fucking dies. Yeah. Gretchen had the nerve to kill off the queen of the TERFs, and it is glorious. I only wish that scene could have been even more brutal. Manhunt is a powerful and important book. I really think all of you could benefit from reading it. But please, if you're trans, be careful with it, because it will hit close to home. And I guess now that I've survived this book, it's about time I forced myself to read Detransition Baby. Or do you have any other recommendations for books about trans people, preferably by trans people, that maybe aren't so bleak? If so, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if it pleases and sparkles, I'll see you in the next video. Mwah. Bye.